Welcome. Looking at Capitol Hill this week, it was really, it was a striking split screen, wasn't it?
It absolutely was.
Right.
On one side, you had the Senate moving like clockwork, almost on certain things.
Yeah, really methodically. But then on the other side, complete paralysis,
Yeah.
a high-stakes standoff over just keeping the government running.
Exactly. And we've got a stack of sources here looking at this legislative week, the key debates, the funding fight, and those lifetime judicial appointments that kept moving forward.
That's really what we want to unpack today. This contrast, the fiscal crisis making headlines, but also that steady confirmation process happening almost underneath it all. And of course, the commentary and critiques flying around.
It highlights some really different priorities playing out simultaneously.
It really does. Before we jump into all the details, though, just a quick reminder. If you find this analysis useful, please take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps us out, and make sure you don't miss future discussions.
Okay, so let's start with maybe the most visible part, the gridlock, the fiscal deadlock.
Right. The big deadline was looming October 1st, end of the fiscal year, and Congress basically, well, failed to get the votes needed to prevent a government shutdown, at least initially.
The main tool they had, or were supposed to use, was the continuing resolution, the CR.
Mm-hmm. That stopgap funding bill just keeps the lights on, basically, while they hash out the bigger full-year budget bills. The specific one was House Resolution 50371.
But that's where things got complicated. The sources show one side using a key Senate procedure, the 60-vote requirement to end debate, called cloture, essentially, as leverage.
So they weren't just voting on funding the government. They were holding up that vote.
Precisely. Holding it hostage, you could say, to try and force negotiations on something completely different.
Which was related to healthcare policy, right? ACA subsidies.
Exactly. An entirely separate policy fight dragged into the must-pass funding bill.
Which, predictably, led to accusations flying back and forth.
Oh, absolutely. The Republicans accused the Democrats of, manufacturing a crisis. They argued for passing a clean CR, just funding, no extra policy stuff tacked on.
The argument being you don't use basic government operations as a bargaining chip for other political wins.
That was the core of their complaint. Yeah.
And this wasn't just abstract political maneuvering. There were real, immediate potential consequences, especially for federal workers.
That's a crucial point. The sources highlight the failure to move forward on another bill, Senate Resolution 3012. It was called the Shutdown Fairness Act.
What was that specifically designed to do?
It was very targeted. It was simply about making sure that essential federal employees, the ones deemed accepted, who have to work even during a shutdown, and also active duty military personnel would actually get paid during that period.
So even ensuring people required to work get paid got caught in the crossfire.
It seems so. The failure to advance that bill meant potentially millions facing financial uncertainty because of this procedural standoff.
It really underscores how these political tactics can have, very direct human costs. Using a procedural rule for leverage ends up potentially hurting families.
And it shows, strategically at least, that preventing immediate disruption to government services and paychecks was, in that moment, considered less critical than winning that unrelated policy fight.
Okay, so that sets up the contrast really clearly. While that whole funding drama was unfolding.
The Senate was actually moving pretty efficiently on another front.
Right. The judicial confirmations. This seems to be the long-term strategic focus.
It really does. Despite the shutdown threat, they kept confirming conservative judges to lifetime seats, reshaping the judiciary, potentially for decades.
Let's look at a couple of examples from this week. William W. Mercer, for instance. He was confirmed to the U.S. District Court in Montana. Vote was 52-45.
And his background is interesting. He's not just a lawyer. He's been a U.S. attorney under George W. Bush and also a Republican state legislator in Montana.
So a political background as well as legal.
Definitely. And the sources detail his record there supporting tougher criminal justice policies, backing a bill requiring local police to cooperate with ICE.
There are other things too, right? Social issues.
Yes, votes on measures restricting abortion access and defining sex as strictly as male or female based on biology at birth. Predictably, this drew opposition from civil rights groups questioning his impartiality.
But then there was another confirmation process moving forward that's maybe even more significant institutionally. Rebecca Taibleson.
Right. Cloture was invoked for her nomination, meaning they got the 60 votes needed to cut off debate for the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The vote was closer, 50-45.
And a circuit court appointment, that's a bigger deal in some ways than a district court, isn't it?
Absolutely. Circuit courts set binding precedent for large regions. The Seventh Circuit covers Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, so her rulings will shape law across those states.
And her background, it seems very much in line with the conservative legal movement.
Textbook example, really. Member of the Federalist Society, clerked for Justice Scalia, and also for Justice Kavanaugh.
Didn't she also testify for Kavanaugh during his confirmation?
She did. She testified in his defense during those contentious 2018 hearings. So her conservative credentials are very clear.
It really shows the priority, doesn't it? Even with the government potentially shutting down, this long-term project of confirming judges continues uninterrupted.
And it's set to continue. The sources, looking at the schedule ahead, show final confirmation votes for Taibleson and another nominee, Bill Lewis, were planned for the following Monday.
So this track keeps moving. It's such a stark difference. The immediate operational track completely stalled, while the long-term institutional track powers ahead.
And that clash, that tension, also spilled over into some really sharp debates about how the executive branch was behaving during this whole shutdown threat.
Ah, yes. The sources definitely picked up on some serious allegations there. One side accused political appointees within the administration of running a, quote, widespread campaign of partisan political activities.
What did that actually involve?
Well, critics pointed to things like putting partisan messages directly onto official government websites, agencies like the Small Business Administration, DOJ, Agriculture.
Okay, using official platforms for political messaging.
Exactly. And reportedly, federal employees were told to use automatic email replies that specifically blamed the shutdown on Senate Democrats blocking House Resolution 5371.
So basically using government resources to assign political blame for the potential shutdown.
That was the accusation. And opponents argued this wasn't just poor form, it potentially broke the law.
Which laws specifically?
They cited things like the Anti-Lobbying Act and specifically the Hatch Act, which is supposed to stop federal employees using their official position for partisan politics. The argument is you can't use taxpayer money for propaganda to support or defeat legislation.
Right. That makes sense. That focus on sort of weaponizing government communication seems to connect to a broader critique we saw in the sources, too, about executive actions undermining democratic norms.
Yeah, that was a significant thread. A lot of concern about independent oversight being weakened.
Particularly the firing or sidelining of inspectors general, the IGs.
Exactly. These are meant to be the independent watchdogs inside agencies. Critics say removing them, especially without the required 30-day notice and a proper reason, poses an existential threat to that independent oversight function.
Because historically, IGs often stayed on even when administrations changed, right?
Yeah.
To maintain that nonpartisan role.
Correct. Beyond the oversight issue, there were also critiques about specific agency cuts, things that critics argued were undermining essential functions, even public safety.
Like the cuts to the U.S. Forest Service.
Yeah, a reported 10% workforce reduction there. That raised immediate fears about wildfire risks, especially with fire seasons getting worse in many areas. Fewer firefighters, potentially bigger problems.
And it wasn't just environmental or safety agencies, was it?
No, the critiques extended to financial oversight, too. The sources mention the effective shutdown of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. Critics frame that as basically giving scammers a green light.
And there was some very strong criticism about USAID as well.
Yes, one analysis linked the dismantling of USAID's functions to, frankly, catastrophic humanitarian outcomes, potentially hundreds of thousands of deaths. Very serious claims.
So if you take all these things together, weakening oversight, the agency cuts, the partisan messaging.
Critics argue it points to the creation of what they termed a prerogative state.
What does that term mean exactly?
It suggests the executive branch is trying to carve out a space around itself where laws can basically be ignored if they get in the way of political goals. A kind of zone of lawlessness, as one source put it.
Almost acting as if it's above the law in certain areas.
That's the implication. And they pointed to specific examples, like the proposal to label Antifa as a domestic terrorist group using a specific directive, NSPM 7.
And the argument against that was
That it would be unconstitutional, that it could lead to investigations and prosecutions based on broad political views, chilling free speech, and basically ignoring legal limits on executive power.
Okay, so wrapping this all together, we've seen these two incredibly different paths in Congress this week. On one path, near failure on the basic task of funding the government.
Right, operational gridlock. But on the other path, real success in achieving a long-term ideological goal, getting conservative judges confirmed to lifetime posts.
And woven through all of this, as the sources show, is this environment of just extreme partisanship, accusations back and forth about damaging institutions, eroding norms.
It really leads to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to think about. The sources touch on this idea that American democracy isn't just about the written rules in the Constitution. It also depends heavily on unwritten rules.
Things like mutual toleration, accepting your political opponents as legitimate players, not enemies, and forbearance, basically. Holding back from using your power to the absolute maximum, even if you technically could. Restraint.
Right. So, given that so much of the debate this week, whether it was about funding or judges or executive actions, seemed to involve actively rejecting those very norms of toleration and forbearance.
Right.
Hmm.
What does that actually mean for the future? How does the Senate, how does the government as a whole function effectively when those foundational unwritten rules seem to be breaking down?
It suggests that maybe the ability of the government to actually work or indeed to fail might depend less on what's strictly legal and more on whether political actors choose to play by those traditional informal rules of the game going forward.
A sobering thought to end on.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this look at a really conflicted week in Congress. We'll see you next time.